all things, we know that all things come full circle, the Tao, don't we? We have a great circle that everything circles round. Well, it spirals, really. It isn't like a vicious circle. It's like a spiral, but everything goes round and round. So Sarah and I go round and round together. We've been together for 30 years, 25 years, something like that, doing our 5-element, fighting our corner for 5-element acupuncture, successfully, I think. And also, the most extraordinary thing for me at my age, because I'm coming to a really interesting year of my life, I'll tell you about that, that we brought 5-element acupuncture, it circled back to China, its country of origin. I mean, it is an extraordinary journey that 5-element acupuncture has gone on. I mean, there are many forms of traditional acupuncture, so it isn't just 5-element, it's what I call the spiritual side of acupuncture, the side that is in the I Ching, and which all the Chinese learn by rote, but they don't know how to apply it, because it's not in modern TCM. And they don't know what to do, but they understand it in a totally different way from Western people, because it's in their DNR. No, it's not DNR, DNA. DNR is a railway, isn't it, or something? It's in them, so they understand it. So it's an extraordinary journey. Came from China through the I Ching, and wandered through the world, came to the West, at a time when in China it was being because of the Cultural Revolution, all the troubles they were having, it became subservient, much derided compared with Western medicine. And this was where there's what I call the schizophrenia of how to approach their traditional acupuncture, their traditional medicine, is still there to some extent, because anybody who wants to study medicine tries to get into Western medicine college, and if they don't, they they have to do traditional medicine. So it's considered a lower rung of medicine. When, if you think what I think, and I'm sure all of us here think, it is one of the highest forms of healing that you can think of, much more complex than Western medicine in its ability to go to the heart of a person and not just to the body of a person. So it was an extraordinary journey that I went on that brought me from London to China quite by chance, if you think there's any chance that but it has created a circle, a beautiful cycle. And I've been there now, I'm going in fortnight again, 12 times. And in that time, what it's done for me, which is so interesting, it's changed me totally, because I've had to change my approach to how I look at what I'm teaching and how I view it, and how I view 5-element acupuncture and what it means for me. So it's been a journey of learning for the Chinese, and a journey of learning for me as well. Okay. I have here notes, because last time I talked in front of the BXC, I went off message apparently, and I said things that were controversial. I don't remember what I said, so I'm being very much better now, and I'm trying to remember what this talk is about, because I have 100 things I could talk about, 1,000 things I could talk about. Now, what I do remember is I did say that at this stage in my life, now I'm in my 81st year, 3 times 3 times 3 is an incredibly auspicious date, very important date. It's in China. It's the date, it's the number of chapters of the I Ching, and I was told by Sandra Hill from Monkey Press that Father La, who did all his lovely translations, and did this lovely dictionary with Elizabeth Rocha de la Vallée of Chinese French dictionary, said I must complete this in my 81st year, because that was such an auspicious year. He also died in that year, so I better get on with it. Well, if I die, I die, don't I? And if I live, I live. But it is surprising that if you come to a certain stage in your life, and that is, that my age is certainly a certain stage in your life, it does make you look at your legacy in a completely different way. You do want to hand on as much as you possibly can. And therefore to have been given the privilege of handing it on in China, where they were sitting with mouths open like little chicks who've been starved for years, and been asked to do that, and actually been asked to live there. Wouldn't you like to live here, Nora, they said, because then you could just go back to your family occasionally, they said, because that's what they need. And it's so, what is so sad is what is seen as an absolute privilege over there, to be learning about something so deep as the spiritual side of acupuncture, and only to be given 2 weeks of our going there. And I go with Guy here, Guy Kaplan, so he goes with me every time, and with Mei Long, who's a Chinese acupuncturist who lives in Holland. So with 3 of us go, and we somehow manage to diagnose, as we are about to do, Guy, in about 2 weeks, about 70 or 80 practitioners. Now, this is completely the opposite of what we've been taught. They've got no chance at all of understanding the elements unless we can help them with their own element. This is one of my big things that I always say is you've got to know yourself first. As any kind of a practitioner, you have to know yourself. You've got to know where you've got your weaknesses, where you've got your strengths. You hope you've got some of those. But you know that you've got lots of weaknesses, and we cast shadows over our patients. There's no doubt. I'm a fire element, and I'm assuming you know about the elements, so I don't have to talk too much about the individual elements. But I'm fire element, so I cast a fire-like glow over my patients, which means I tend to smile a bit too much. I tend to want to help them a bit too much. I tend to interfere with them too much. I was known as a child, as somebody said, don't you think you ought to everybody? And I still sort of feel saying, don't you think you ought to? It's my natural way of being, trying to, yes, come on you, do this, do that, which is the small intestine within fire, the inner, what I call inner fire, the need to help the heart get it right. And so my shadow that I cast over patients is going to be one of interfering too much. It took me a long time to realize I had to stand back more. You know, if I'm with a metal patient, I have to stand back. They're not going to want me all over them. They're going to walk out of the door. But if I can understand what it must be like to need space, then I can deal with that better. Even though deep inside myself, I don't want space. So I've got to sort of talk myself through how I deal with that. So this has been a great challenge for us going to China, is how do we, in a short time, pass on something so very profound, which they're absolutely desperate to learn, and in the short space of time available, which has meant changing how I view my teaching and my practice. So it's given me a huge amount of insight into what is good, how one should be teaching, and also how little one needs to do, but as a teacher, but how lot that each of us as a learner has to do inside ourselves. And we tend, on the whole, not to be too good at looking at ourselves. You know, we tend to think we're rather nice. We tend to think we're loving to our patients. We don't want to know that the negative side of our particular element. And as I'm a 5-element acupuncture, I assume and believe it as an utter truth. It's not been counteracted, or it's not been ever sort of undone by anything I've done in my 35 years of practice, that everybody does seem to have an element. I call it our elemental DNA. It does seem to be true, because if you manage to find that element, that's difficult enough. If you manage to find that element and hone in on that element, there's transformation. And there's absolutely no doubt about that. And that is something that the Chinese do understand. So I had to learn a way of adapting the normal 3-year course, which I did, and all of you presumably have done at your various training colleges, first year this, second year this, third year clinical. I had to, hours and hours of looking at patients and taking pulses and all the rest of it. And I had to adapt that somehow to help these people who were all qualified acupuncturists. They were all actually doctors of medicine. I mean, had to do Western medicine to be qualified there, so that they were very educated and had done and knew everything about where to put a needle. That's true, isn't it, Guy? I mean, they're way beyond anything I felt I was at that stage. You know, they all know their points, they all know this, but they don't know what to do with it. That was the thing, that they literally don't know what to do with it, because somewhere those coming to our sort of courses, our seminars, are following something which is the spirit. And that's the thing that they felt that is missing from what they'd done before. There is a lovely thing. I hope I've got my pencil here. Have I got a pencil here? No. Can somebody give me a... Thank you. Oh, it's dropped. Thank you. I mean, it's such a tiny little lesson, but it taught me more, I think, in, 2 seconds than anything I'd learned about spirit. I was taught by J.R. Worslitz, and, and so he said, all of us now, just pick up a pencil and just do that, needle a point. So we went, like that. He said, now, and then immediately the room felt different. Now, lift up your needle. This is your patient. Put your needle against the patient, and now needle. And the whole room, as it did here a minute, goes quiet, because you're needling with your spirit. And it was somehow this moment, I remember this pencil, all of us jabbing it into the desk, thinking, what on earth are we doing? And then when he said, this is now how you're going to needle. You're going to put your pencil or needle on the patient, and then his voice dropped like mine is, and now you're going to think, I'm now helping this patient heal. And it's all quiet, and now you needle. And that taught me how even just the way you approach the needle is going to affect what the needle is going to do. There's no question about that. So even if you don't know, if you're a 5-element acupuncturist, you've got not a clue what element you're treating, you don't know what you're doing, just remember that every time you approach the patient with your spirit, you're doing something. And of course, if you approach them with your spirit all the time, if you look at them and everything, and you're giving them a healing just by that. There are two interesting things that I heard over there. One, I think it's in the leaflet about what I'm talking, which was this very high up person. He was a head of a province in China. I was treating him, and he suddenly said, as it says in the notes, "We need you here. We've lost our soul in China." And I remember thinking, that's an extraordinary thing for a politician to say. Could you imagine Theresa May saying that? Could you imagine any Tony Blair saying we've lost our soul in England, even though I think we have? I mean, let's be honest, I don't think there's much soul going on there in politics. But it was such a very revealing remark about the depth of the Chinese understanding of the spirit, even at the levels of, politics. And that taught me that somewhere inside them, they understand it in a way that took me years to understand, if you like. So that was the first thing, which really moved me enormously. And then I asked, at the end of the seminar, we asked some of the students to say what they've learned. And one of the practitioners started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Well, I met you in the hotel. We happened to stay in the same hotel. And you looked at me." And I suddenly thought, that's it, of course. We take it for granted we look at our patients. Well, I hope we do. Do we not all look at our patients? If we're doctors, we might be looking at the computer. That is the difference, or looking at notes and things. But as practitioners, with only a needle between us and the patient, which is lovely, and a tiny little thing like that, which is in our hands, touching their body, we are all, I hope, looking at the patient as we needle. Once you've got over the fear of needling as a beginner, you need to be looking at the patient so that you know what's going on. And as you're looking, and this is what this practitioner said, "You looked at me." And she said, and I realized that the Chinese, at that level, teacher, pupil, don't look at each other. I was at a meeting once, and I was, lots of high up people. I was going to be almost stop talking about 500 people, few of us there. And I was in this sort of ante-room, and nobody looked at me. They were all talking to each other, but nobody looked at me. And I realized it was probably not polite to look at me. I think that was a cultural thing. But my goodness, it felt awkward standing there with every, I wanted to go up and say, look, I'm here, you know, we're all going to talk to 500 people, can't we just smile at each other? And so it isn't usual for somebody, a teacher, to be looking at a student. And that was interesting. And that taught me a lot about why they find it so extraordinary when we come and we have a lovely time, don't we, Guy? We give them, it's like a sort of party we give them, because we're so much relationship, and then they are learning so very fast. Now, the interesting thing is that the thing that they found, because they found the most difficult, was this idea of where that we were thinking of touching emotions, dealing with emotions. And they found that very difficult to start with. If you asked them to talk about their patient, it was always physical things they were telling you. This patient has been coming for 2 years, you know, they've got trouble with their skin or their bowels or this. It could have been a Western doctor talking. Now I notice, and it's lovely, when they present their patients, they're presenting the whole person. This person's got trouble at home, this person is finding it difficult dealing with their child, you know, you can't cope with their, that's the emotional, whatever you like to call that side, the inner part of a life, the emotional, spiritual side is coming to the fore. So that's been an enormous plus. How we've, though, helped them learn about their elements is I mean, it's a hit and miss. I mean, isn't it, Guy? It really is. It's not what I would recommend you to do. But it's working. If you've got 70, 80 odd new people who want to know their element, and you're going to leave them in 10 days or 2 weeks, how on earth do you help them? They can't do 5-element acupuncture without having some idea of where they fit in the cycle. And that's the difficult thing. An awful lot of people, maybe us, who practice 5-element acupuncture aren't really sure of their elements. Thank you. That's it. Thank you. Aren't really sure of their elements. I think to be sure of your element, you've got to sort of feel there's been some sort of a change in you. It's a sort of recognition, which I know that, I felt very strongly, that at last I know who I am. It was this, and I was a complete, I had nothing to do with anything Eastern or anything like that, and suddenly I found myself on a couch, because I met an acupuncturist at a party, and it happened to be 5-element, because in those days it was mostly a 5-element, let's be honest. And I must have had an age rein, presumably. He wanted to know all about me and my family, my life. I found that fascinating. And then I presume he must have done some fire points, because it was good treatment. Whatever it was good. And I woke up the next day transformed. I mean, completely different from what I'd felt before. It's a bit of a luck of the draw if that happens after one treatment. I don't expect it to happen with my patients, but occasionally it does. And maybe it needed to happen to me because I was going to go on and try and teach a lot of people, or whatever. There was some reason in my life. But once I knew what was going on in me, and I knew what it could feel like for an element to suck up the treatment, it's almost like, long last, it's like parched part of you is suddenly fed something, some water, some food. That is what you hope to do with your patients. Now, you can do it up to a certain point if you hope you know your element. But it is good to get the feeling that you're not all the time saying, do you think I'm metal? Do you think I'm water? What do you think? And that is the trouble with that, is that you end up listening to what other people think, and they've probably not got a clue. You know, it's funny how often other people seem to think they know about your element. You know what I mean? Don't listen to anybody unless you've had a bit of treatment from them and you trust their treatment. Remember, they've got to be good practitioners, and you feel different. It's no good thinking, I think I must be wood, because I do get angry. We all get angry. I mean, I get really angry. Don't mention Brexit, okay? I get really, really angry, and you think I was as wood as you come. Listen to my voice. I can immediately sound like a shouting voice. I get furious and everything. And then I can be very sad with metal. If I think about the world, I can go really sad and feel, what's life about? And my voice has now gone down into a weeping voice. And if I can be terribly kind as well, I can look after my patients beautifully and cuddle them, and now I can sound like I'm Earth, can't I, singing. It's easy we were made of all five, so it's easy for us to take bits of it at different appropriate times to show appropriate emotion. But it is very, very important to know our element. Anybody who is in doubt, try and find an experienced practitioner. You know, I went chasing up to Leamington all the time to be treated. That's from London. That was quite a thing. And I have an American patient who comes over from America to be treated. So I mean, you can find your way if you want to, and you will then and find yourself to somebody who seems to know what they're doing, and then see if something happens to you. If you then feel some kind of a profound feeling that this is, yes, I do feel all right, not necessarily amazing, but just, yeah, it seems, you know, I'm making better decisions. I feel a bit lighter. Yes, I've managed to say no to a boss or something. Just little things that show you that somehow your elements are now much more in trim and holding. Then once you've got your element, then make sure you know its negative sides. That's the important part, because its negative sides are going to be the things that are going to overshadow your patients. Its positive ones, well, you hope it means that you're more aware of other people. But be careful of the negative sides. And we should all know what our element, you know, what we don't do well. We should all do that. Right there. Now, what the Chinese found so interesting was that we were talking about them, what's inside them, their inner part, the inner part. They don't have, in TCM, well, I don't know about what you do for TCM, anybody who's a TCM practitioner here. I don't know what you do. And perhaps living in an environment where we take it for granted, we're treating body and soul. It may be that with TCM that the spirit is, in an English context, comes into it a lot. I don't know, because I've only done 5-element acupuncture. I've never done anything else, so I don't know. But in China, it is definitely like that. You know, I see them, you know, when particularly they're doing herbs, they sit on the other side of the desk with their hands like this on the pulse, looking at a book. So it just feels like you're going into a Western medical clinic. And so the idea of hands-on and touching and feeling about what's going on in the patient is very new to them. But they absolutely love it, because I think that their knowledge of the elements is very profound. They love it. And so their approach to the spiritual is very easy to activate. So now we then have these 70 there, and or 80 or something, and they've got 10 days or a fortnight in which for us to confirm our diagnosis as best we can. And I never say that you diagnose and that's it. Oh, I know that patient is wood, I know that patient is fire. You should never say that. We don't know what anybody is, but treatment starts telling us whether we're on the right track. And the patient is going to tell us. You know, the patient is not by words, and never, as I blogged recently, never ever ask a patient how they feel at the end of treatment, because they haven't got a clue how they feel. But look at them and you see how they feel. In other words, you get much better at observing tiny little changes, and that's how one confirms one's diagnosis. It isn't a patient saying, oh, I had a lovely time since the last treatment, and you look up, oh, I did fire then, oh, it must be fire. It isn't that. It's that the person coming in looks a bit different, or says something, as I said before, something about, oh, I'm dealing better with my children, or I seem to have, I seem to change the kind of clothes I wear, or I seem to have eating different things, or, I'm going to give up my job now, that sort of thing. Those are the big things that tell you, yes, something very profound is happening within the patient. That is moving the patient to think it's moving in a good direction. And I've never, ever had anybody say, I feel worse after treatment. This is after 30 years or more of treating. Never, except temporarily, if there is a block. You know, you can have one of the major entry-exit blocks. It could be the possession, but I mean, it's usually treated that early on if it's unlikely to suddenly be there, but it might be. Husband-wife is a big one. You know, there are things which make you see there's something going wrong in the patient. But everything's flowing normally, no blocks. No patient I've ever known has said, I felt awful after that treatment. You know, we were taught if somebody did say that, always say good, because it's a because it usually is good. Any change is better than none. So why is the patient thinking they're feeling awful? Is it that somehow you've touched something by talking to them and they didn't really want to talk about it? You know, they're beginning to think, no, I don't want to, this is an area I don't want to talk about, or Nora's got control over me and I don't want to be in somebody else's power. That's one of the big patient practitioner issues, which some very much sort of therapy junkies, therapy junkies often move from therapy to therapy because they want to control it. And I never like, I just don't treat anybody who starts moving away and, you know, let them go to somebody else, you know. And also there's something very, you know, it's sad, but they don't want to really get better. They enjoy the whole process of upsetting their practitioner, and there's that sort of dynamic can happen. And since you've always got to be in control of a patient in the practice room, if the patient starts controlling you, you've got to stop the treatment. You can't carry on if a patient is, oh, I do find you rather, which to me, what's one person said, I find you awfully dominating, you know. Or awfully, what was it? Oh, your energy's so strong, it makes me feel so inadequate. And then what you should then say, oh, well, I don't think I'm your the right practitioner for you, am I? No, I'm going to, you know, it was straight away. You have to take control. Don't ever get, oh, I'm sorry, I'll try and talk more quietly. They've got to accept you as you are. I mean, I try not to talk too fast and too loudly, but I can't stop it, as you can hear. And I try, but if the patient doesn't like it, they go. I mean, it's too bad. Somebody else does. Most of my patients, 99%, like me, and the 1% goes, I think. Do you see what I mean? And you can't hurt. There's nothing I've done that has ever really been dangerous to a patient. No, you can't, unless you needle too deeply. What else can you do that's wrong? But what is wrong is if you keep on needling and nothing happens and the patient doesn't change, then you've got to look at yourself and say, am I getting this right? There's something wrong. You know, we go with a sort of silence comes from each treatment, and you want to sort of a dialogue with the patient's energy. So now we're going back now to how we do this in 2 weeks. What we do in many treatments. I mean, to do a diagnosis in normal, I mean English or in European terms, would be do a 2-hour talk to a patient for 2 hours, spend it, then keep on adding to the diagnosis every time the patient comes to see you. So you're really, every treatment is a new form of diagnosis. It's just a hypothesis, the first one, and then it's confirmed or negated the next time. So you're all the time trying to learn more about the patient. You're not saying, oh, this is far, put it in a box, put it away. That's when you never get proper results, because your mind is blocked off. And you've got, very often you think it's so obviously fire, as I've often thought, and because I like it to be fire, because I think, oh, I can relax now, can't I? And then it's water, or it's wood or something, and you think, my God, I didn't see that. So you have to be very honest with yourself. Now, to do that with these 70 or 80 practitioners in China is a huge challenge, but a pleasant one, because they're so happy to do anything to help them. So we line them up, don't we, Guy? We line them up. Do not do this in England. We line them up, about 6 or 7, how many? 5 in a row. They have a platform where we talk, so they're sitting up, and they're sitting on chairs like that. And we've got all their photos in front, and they're very good at giving us all their photos, so immediately they all turn up. There are pages of photos. And we tell them to sit in the order of the photos, and somebody calls out their Chinese name, and we try and work out which it is, you know. And then we ask them to say something. Now that is fascinating. If I were to do the same with you, I'm sure all of you would see absolutely different things of the people sitting here. You do the best sort of learning about the elements you possibly can by just by comparing people. So they talk a little bit, and then, interesting enough, the guy, May, and I have got much better at suddenly thinking, God, that does look like wood. And we ask each other, do you think it might be ? Would? We ask each other. And then there's two of us may say two, and the other says no, and then we just wait. Then we go on, and gradually you can see the difference between the people or the similarity. That's where it's so good. So later on, we put 5 earths together so that the class can see 5 earths. And then suddenly we've put these people we've thought were these elements, and as we see them for 2 weeks, and I've been going around, and the guy had this brilliant idea of putting a little tabs, coloured tabs in the colour of the element on them. So from a long way away, I can see, we said that was water. Wait, it doesn't look like water to me. And then I go round the class and try and sort of listen, maybe smell a bit, try and get the feeling of the colour or whatever, all the CSOE that we know, the colour, sound, smell, and emotion that we know. And we try and see whether we've got it right. And then that is a challenge, that's one challenge, and then I don't mind getting it wrong. I don't think right and wrong are good words either. It's like the first hypothesis, the second, and then the correct hypothesis, and we can only do the best we can. And really, that's all you can ever ask of anybody in life, to do the best we can. Everybody only copes as far as they can cope. In other words, if I don't get it right, or the 3 of us don't get it right, well, what can we do? We've done the best we can. If you don't get it right with your patient and the patient leaves you, you've done the best you can. If you start thinking you've got to be perfect, which is somehow an assumption behind everything that we do, that somehow, we've got to get things right, that is putting an enormous pressure on us, and isn't at all it isn't a balanced adult way of being. I know there are many times in life I've made mistakes, and I've wished I hadn't this, and I wished and then you have to forgive yourself, number one, and say at the time, that was all I could do, that was all I could cope with. So at the time, those elements are the only elements we can see. They come back regularly, these people, and my being a great looker at people, I suddenly see somebody over there, and I say to the guy, what do we say she was? And he will say, he's better at remembering. He will say, water. I say, don't think so. So then I'll go up to that person and say, look, come, I'm not sure you are water. I'm going to look at you over the next few days, and we're going to, try and see. And when you're looking at people from outside, supposing they're talking to each other or guys doing something, teaching them, and I'm standing away, I see very much more easily how they're interacting with other people. And then I go up and say, sorry, I think it's wood. But let's see. So then we give them a trip. Each of them gets an A drain. They do that themselves. They're all trained to do A drains. All of them do preliminary course, so they know how to needle a 5-element way. They know the Roman numerals that we in 5-element acupuncture use, like 2 for small intestine and 6 for the 3-heater, and they call it 3-heater. They call it heart protector, not pericardium. We have our own words. And they know the Roman numerals just like that. They've all learned them. And they learn the points, and they learn everything I tell them they've learned by the time we come back the next time, because they video everything, and they watch the videos all the time. So I'm being videoed here. I doubt if you're going to watch my video, but if you were Chinese, you'd be sitting looking at that now for the next 6 months, trying to disentangle something that's going to help you in your practice. So, and then it gets disseminated by what is it called, Guy? By WeChat or something? Is it WhatsApp? It goes round and round, because yesterday, nice Master Wu, who's Chinese, who does the Qigong, said to me, I saw you on television. No, I saw you in, what would he have seen me? When they videoed me talking about 5-element acupuncture 2 years ago. He said, I said, oh, that's Nora, he said. So he said, it was WeChat. You see, so that it gets disseminated in a way that we don't disseminate now, except that, to my delight, the Biaxi is disseminating it much more. But I don't think we have the same, we're an old civilization, and we're rather sort of placid and not very enterprising about learning. They're totally new in their learning. So for them to be able to learn from a Western person of a certain age, my age comes in, I'm treated like, they carry my bag, and I'm treated like I'm 100 there, over there. which isn't bad because I'm, soon I will be. But also, they also listen to me like I'm 100, and I've therefore got 100. Oh, I've got 81 years experience. Now that is accepted as being amazing, and to learn from somebody with experience, it is the highest thing they can learn, as opposed to in the West where you people are chucked out of university posts at 55, aren't they, and things like that, because it's cheaper to have a young person in. So there's no respect for experience in the West, in my view, at all, whilst this is totally different in the East. And that means that they learn so much faster than anything I've ever done in the West. And so it's so easy teaching them. You just tell them one thing once, and they've the whole class, there may be, like next time 150 of them are there, 150 will have learnt it. And then that evening, they get together to do things. What sort of things they do in the evening, Guy?
So they sometimes watch the videos for qualification, or they do some CSOE exercises.
They do exercises. They carry on. They don't just stop and say, oh, thank God, as I imagine most of you will say, very soon she's going to stop, I can have a cup of coffee. That is the sort of Western approach. They instead of that, it is, oh, goodness, can't you? Well, they still want to stop on time, that's fine. They still want to stop on time, but they want to go on in their own way to learn. So that's the reward of teaching over there. And the challenge is, how do you help them in a culture where there's no other 5-element acupuncturists out there except the few we have trained. But there are not only few now, they're now, I mean, there's a huge charity thing that has been set up, which is doing the background to traditional forms of medicine, which includes herbs, and it includes massage and the history of traditional medicine and 5-element acupuncture and other forms of acupuncture. They're doing a huge interest in that. So I went in and they wanted me to come along, and they always give me certificates and things. They wanted me to come along and get a certificate because I'm in charge of the 5-element part of a 3-year program, I gather. And this was the room. I mean, if you think that's a large room, no. Yes, this one when we were all in one room. It was like you couldn't see the end of the room, absolutely jammed with young people wanting to learn about traditional forms of acupuncture, and all absolutely delighted to be there. So there is enormous interest over there. So that's one of the challenges, and the reward is, well, the challenge is the feeling that I'm not there long enough. I mean, I'm always trying to get Guy to go longer, haven't I? Well, you are going to at some point, aren't you, Guy? I'm pushing May to go longer and everything. I think, twice a year is enough for me, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to manage to go. So, I mean, one's got to be practical. But they are teaching themselves. The other thing that is so really sort of challenging is, how do they adapt their kind of treating in an environment where they're doing I don't know what you call it, multi-bed treatments, where there's loads, you go in a room and there must be loads of beds and they go from one to the other. And how can they then change that into an environment where they're one-to-one with a patient? They find that very difficult, because they're not, they're, I don't know how they're paid. I've never quite worked. Some of them are paid individually, not badly. I mean, I'm surprised how much they're paid, actually, like £50 a treatment or something. So it's not, I thought it might be much lower than that. So some of them make quite a good living, I think. But it's a question of how do they have time for the people who need it? And how do they then adapt the kind of thing we say, which is one-to-one, in a situation where it's not expected over there at all? That is a challenge. That is a difficulty. So their training is going to be very much sort of like doesn't tally with the kind of thing we're trying to do. And of course, what is my biggest worry is that in this country too, we don't seem to be having there is not as much interest in developing 5-element acupuncture as there was when I started. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there was only the college at Leamington, is that right? Was there other colleges? I mean, you are from but yes, I mean, there was, and it just so happened, I met an acupuncturist who was trained there, And that's when I thought I would go. And I originally didn't want to be an acupuncturist. I wanted to find out why I felt so different. And in those days, it was possible to and as I've said in my little bit of writing I've given you, it was possible to, and I think it was £30 a month, a standing order, something as ridiculous as that, it really was. But I mean, £30 would be perhaps 300 now, but it was, or perhaps less, but it was very little. And we only went up for 2 days every month, and there was no research, and no complicated portfolios, or all these things that poor old students have to do now. It was very hands-on and look at people all the time. So I was very fortunate that that's when I trained. I'm not sure I could have coped with the training now in the same way, because I'm not a researcher, and I couldn't see how the research fitted in with practical acupuncture. And I just did a year thinking I was just learning about the elements. That I remember sitting in the class, and somebody talked about the fire element. And I was in the front row, as I usually like to sit in the front row, probably because I couldn't hear very well even then, but I liked being, anyway, I sat in the front row, and somebody started talking about the fire and the heart. And I remember just saying to myself, this is so simple, why have I not learnt it before? And that's what I love about what we do, is that it is so simple, and it gets simpler the longer you practice. There's no doubt about that. It's as if we complicate things and think, we've got to smell everybody, we've got to see the colour, we've got to, what else is smell, colour, sound, smell, odour, emotion. Well, emotion, we all probably are the one we all home in on, because that's what's coming towards us. The colour is difficult to see, smell is even more difficult, I think. What is it? Sound is difficult, particularly if you've got bad hearing as I have. But so with everybody sitting there peering at their patient, and that is what I realized, is that I never peer at a patient. And I'm trying to get that across. This is the challenge in China, is what do you feel? It's here the work is done. That is the most important thing, is where it isn't done out there. Out there is the doctors looking at their computer screens to see what they prescribed last time for you. Out there is sitting like this thinking, well, is that red? Is that, is that, do I smell? That is, that doesn't tell you anything unless something in you responds, which is spirit to spirit, of course. We're going back to the beginning, what I said, it is spirit to spirit. And so to teach that to the Chinese is something that was fascinating, because I realized that I was more and more concentrating the treatment, the teaching, in a way that made it much simpler for me to teach, so that you had to do less and less to tell the students that all they have to do is look at people, but just look. Just what do you feel? So, if I'm sitting next to you, and what am I feeling? How close do you want me to sit? And I will know immediately, as soon as your face changes, that I'm getting too close. So what does that mean? If you came too close to me, I'd be like this. Some elements, particularly earth, don't mind that. Other elements will be well back. Other elements might be metal, will be standing like that, hating it, but not going to show it. Because, because metal is going to make sure it won't go, it will do it at some point. It won't show like that, like water. It won't but it will show it by, after I've stopped looking at you, or you look, I will then move my chair away quietly. That would be metal. Water would jerk it back if they think they're frightened. So each of these little tiny things coming from a person should be resonating here in us. So the work is here. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you don't have to have anything else but yourself in 5-element acupuncture. That's all you need. And perhaps in any therapy, it's yourself. Perhaps not Western medicine if you've got to look up a drug. Or obviously Western medicine does enormously good things in certain areas. There's no doubt about that. But I wonder whether a psychotherapist is thinking really it's here that they're feeling it. I think they, and I doubt if they're thinking it quite as much as we do because of the elements. But what do you think, Sarah? Do you think psychotherapists are thinking, how do I feel?
I think it depends what system they are, but it's getting the head and the heart connected.
It is. It's what system. It's what kind of psycho. You know, there are all sorts of forms that are much more sort of the whole person orientated. And those that it was the. I realised that I was being privileged by being asked to, by sheer chance, being asked to go over to China just because I met a girl, this May, who was it, and she came to a seminar in Holland that I did, and she said she wrote to somebody in China who's the most well-known person who's ever written about traditional medicine. He invited me over, and lo and behold, there I'm sitting on the plane going to, it was Nanning, South China to start with, and I just, I didn't have a clue why on earth I was there. And suddenly realizing I'd be given this bonus, and the bonus, this real gift, and it was a gift at my age to realize that I was allowed to develop a kind of, the purest kind of way of teaching how to see the elements I could think of for people who hadn't got much chance to learn it from me. So that was a bonus, it really was. And what it did was confirm to me, as anybody who knows me knows that I was trained by J.R. Worsley, and I thought he was a master, and I do not say that lightly. I'm not but he sort of felt people. And I remember going up for treatment with him, and I remember going and feeling fine, and he walked in, and I burst into tears. And I just couldn't stop bursting into tears. Is he telling me it's 5 minutes to go? Is that what he's telling? Yes, yes. So, and that was it. That was coming from him. It was something in him that made me open my heart. And that's what you sort of hope you can manage to do with your patients. And that's what, in a way, I think was so brilliant about what I've been taught with by learning about what I've been taught by going to China was to simplify everything. It made it possible for me to see the real crux of what we need to do. Now, I've got to stop in it. Is it now immediately? Oh, I've got 5 minutes. Somebody put 5 minutes. That's right. I was watching these signals going up 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's 5. Thank you, Mickey. Okay. Any questions? And if you have, could you write them down, or can you tell it to Guy? Because I don't hear them very well, and I'll only mistake what you're saying. So has anybody got any questions the last 5 minutes? And I'm happy to answer anything, not just about this. Anything about anything, but about acupuncture.
There's a few pictures of this house round. Was it meant to
Yes,
slide
yes.
to some of the groups?
Oh, yes, do show that, yes. That's us that's us, yes. Yes.
Would you ever consider doing exchanges so students come from China?
Well, they want to, but then where would they go in England? Where would they go? Apart from a 5-element clinic. They can't go to any teaching establishment. There's nobody doing proper 5-element. They're totally focused on 5-element. They've got everything else in China. They've got masses of other colleges and universities in England that they can go to, which is TCM oriented or mixed orientated. And let me say what I think about mixed TCM and 5-element, which I don't think is what they should be going to. They'll only get muddled. So it would be nice if you could, but where would they go in this country? And that breaks my heart. That's why the more, if some of you are doing 5-element, for God's sake, start passing it on. This is the most important thing. Not many people, there are not many of us, pure 5-element people left doing it, teaching. That's why Sarah and I, Guy, we're delighted that we're handing this on. It isn't that difficult. What J.R. said to me when I thought, I don't know, they've asked me to teach, I don't know what I'm doing. He said, you know more than they do, Nora. And that's the best teacher you can ever have. If you've done a year more 5-element, then you pass it on to somebody who hasn't done any. But we need you. We need you. And it shouldn't frighten you at all. It shouldn't frighten you. That's how I learned. I was a total pioneer teaching in evening classes. And I found myself talking about the elements before I'd even qualified properly. Endlessly talking and talking and talking. And the problem is where is, there is not enough pure 5-element being taught. That's my great, and of course I had to close my school because we had quite a lot of problems keeping it going because people didn't like pure 5-element. So I fought like mad for 10 years, got it, did some good stuff, but I gave up. I decided enough is enough. The credit crunch was coming, and I could see and so I tried, didn't I try? Oh my God, I tried. And Guy, did I try? So I'm saying to anybody who has a real, it's a very rarefied profession. It is an odd thing, five-element acupuncture. You have to have a sort of feeling for human beings and understand it is, you can't look it up in books. Somewhere there's some feeling, and that if you have that, then pass it on. Pass it on. Sorry, I wish I could bring them all over, the Chinese. They want to come, but I don't know where they go. I don't know what I would teach them over here. Better me go there. Anything else? Any other question, or is that the end? Right, yes, Audley.
Well, just to, it's not so much a question, but maybe, well, I mean, I studied at Leamington originally, and we didn't have a single written handout, not a single bit of type, or where we had JR's Red Book, beautiful, beautiful book, but not a single thing. But it was total. It was a total for 3 years. You did nothing. I remember I came back one day and I went to the gym, and Mina Hyrie said, "What are you doing going back to the gym?" She was astonished that I was doing something. It was total immersion in understanding.
Yes,
elements.
yes, it was.
And that was 25 years ago, and
Yes.
I never regretted it.
No.
I went to Reading, which was wonderful, where some of our teachers went, but I was totally, and that's a lot of education, I was totally confused and muddled. And so I think what I'm saying is that I think we do have to just be these days. We've got such an overload of information. So, our cogs are spinning, and all our patients' cogs are spinning. But we just have to be.
Yes,
This
it's
is
quite
the beauty.
true.
JR once, I heard him a very long time ago in St James's Piccadilly, and he
Yes.
stood up and he said, I'm an old way, he said, "This is so simple, a child could
Yes,
understand."
that's right.
And it's true. I know today it's so simple if we can just be children.
I drove him down there. I arranged for the St James's thing. I remember that. Yes, that was when we were starting the school. Yeah. It is so simple, but people don't really appreciate simplicity. They think it must be complex. They think simple must be inferior, childish. Everything. The most profound truths are the ones that are simple. The more profound they are, the simpler they become. I think with that profound word, I think I will finish now. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Nora is going to be here for a little bit longer. She's going to be signing her new book.